On a frozen winter night, a former U.S. Army officer begins a desperate search for his missing son. But every clue he finds leads deeper into a dark network that should not exist. And a voice on an old military radio whispers a chilling truth.
The boy
is alive,
but you're not the only one they're after.
What this father discovers in the snow will test faith, courage, and the fragile line between miracles and fear. Before the story continues, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We have viewers from all over the world, and it means so much to see this community grow. A thin sheet of winter wind crawled through Minneapolis, dragging flakes of icy dust across the streets. Ethan Ward stood beside a light pole on Riverside Avenue, smoothing the edges of yet another missing child poster with fingers stiff from cold. At 46, Ethan carried the build of a man carved from discipline. Broad shoulders beneath a worn charcoal field jacket, jaw sharply cut, short, dark blonde hair touched with gray at the temples, and a 2-day stubble that had become a permanent fixture since Jake vanished. His blue-gray eyes, once steady and commanding, now carried the dull shine of a man who slept little and hoped too much. Formerly a senior officer in the U.S. Army's Tactical Operations Division, Ethan once orchestrated missions with absolute precision. But nothing in his years of service had prepared him for this. The disappearance of his 14-year-old son, Jake Ward, a quiet boy with messy brown hair, a love for drawing comic heroes, and a smile shy enough to hide his brilliance. When Jake vanished 2 weeks ago after school, authorities labeled it a probable runaway. Ethan labeled it a failure of everyone but him. Beside him stood Ranger, his 6-year-old German Shepherd canine, large and muscled, with a sable coat and intelligent amber eyes. The dog moved with the calm weight of training, silent, observant, loyal, yet even in him, Ethan noticed an unease. Jake had been Ranger's closest companion. Without the boy, the dog paced the house at night, whining under his breath as if chasing a scent he barely remembered. Tonight, Ranger pressed his nose to the freezing pavement, following some thread of odor only he could detect. Ethan trusted that nose more than he trusted most men. He pushed another poster onto a cracked brick wall. Dozens were already scattered across the city. Bus stops, alleyways, convenience stores. And still no word. Minneapolis in winter felt like a maze of quiet apartments, cold headlights, and doors that stayed shut. Ethan walked through streets many avoided, tight clusters of old duplexes, shops with flickering neon signs, corners where poverty sat like a permanent shadow. If Jake had been taken, someone here might have seen something. If he had wandered, someone here might have heard something. And if someone from Ethan's past was involved, the evidence might bleed through the cracks of these forgotten neighborhoods. Ranger suddenly stiffened, tail rising. He sniffed toward a narrow alley where trash bins lined the wall like rusted soldiers. Ethan followed, slipping between the shadows. There, half buried under slushy snow, Ranger unearthed a thin green cord. Ethan knelt, brushing away the ice. It was a length of military-grade paracord, cut deliberately, not torn. Only certain branches of the Army used this exact weave. Ethan's breath tightened. "This shouldn't be here," he murmured, rubbing the cord between his thumb and forefinger. Someone using equipment from his former world had passed through this part of the city. He told himself to stay rational, but an uneasy pulse crawled beneath his ribs. Someone with training. Someone who knew him. As he pocketed the cord, a noise cracked in the far corner of the alley. A woman stepped out from behind the dumpsters, startled by the sight of a large man and a canine unit emerging from the dark. Her name was Sarah Green, a thin, long-legged woman in her early 30s with a narrow face, pale freckled skin, and auburn hair tied back in a loose bun. She wore a cheap supermarket apron beneath her oversized winter coat and tiredness clung to her like an extra layer. Sarah worked the closing shift at a nearby diner, juggling 2 jobs after her husband left years ago, a bitterness that made her wary of strangers, especially men. She clutched her grocery bag to her chest. "Sir, are you looking for someone?" she asked, voice hesitant but not unkind. Ethan showed her the poster. She studied Jake's face with empathetic sadness. "I haven't seen him, but my nephew disappeared last year. Police never did a thing." The tremor in her voice was small, but real. Ethan gave her a grateful nod. Ranger sniffed her shoes, then pulled gently toward the street again. When they returned to the car, Ethan felt the weight of every minute Jake had been missing. He sat behind the wheel, gripping it until his knuckles whitened. His thoughts spiraled, memory after memory of Jake laughing at the park. Jake feeding Ranger scraps at the dinner table. Jake saying, "Dad, I'll be fine walking home." The guilt sliced through him. He should have driven Jake that day. He should have known the danger. A father who once commanded soldiers now failed to protect his own child. Back home, the house felt colder than the streets. Ethan tossed his jacket over a chair and set the paracord on the table beside a dusty box of his old military belongings. Ranger circled the living room, restless. Ethan opened the box. Inside was a broken field radio, bruised from years of deployment. It had stopped working long before he retired, but when Ethan lifted it, something inside rattled. A loose component, maybe, or maybe something else. Ranger whined softly, staring at the device as if recognizing a familiar ghost. Ethan placed the radio on the counter and stepped into the kitchen to warm his hands. The wind howled outside, scraping against the windows. For a moment the house fell silent. Too silent. Then a burst of static exploded from the radio. Ethan froze. The device wasn't connected to anything. It shouldn't even have power. Static crackled again, louder, sharper, until a distorted voice forced itself through the noise. "Tower. Kid alive. 0900. Ethan's heart slammed into his chest. Ranger growled, ears pinned forward. Someone was sending a message. Someone knew about Jake. And someone wanted Ethan to hear it. The static from the old field radio still echoed in Ethan Ward's skull as he drove through the sleeping veins of Minneapolis, headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the snow. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, rigid with alertness, his amber eyes following every shifting shadow outside. The German shepherd sensed the change in Ethan's breathing, the tension that had set like cold iron in his chest after hearing the words, "Kid alive," so 100, crackle through a device that should not have functioned. Ethan drove toward the freight district, an industrial stretch of tracks, silent factories, and acres of rusted containers abandoned by time and weather. The radio signal had pulsed strongest here, as if someone had intentionally drawn him toward the outskirts. They stopped beside a row of shipping containers coated in frost. The metal groaned in the wind, each unit like a long-forgotten tomb. Ranger jumped from the truck, nose to the ground, tracing invisible threads of scent across the snow. Ethan followed, flashlight slicing across graffiti-marked steel. The cold gnawed at his face, but the fear inside burned hotter than the weather. Ranger halted at a dark red container near the back of the yard. His tail stiffened, and he let out a sharp, low bark, the signal he used when he identified a scent that matched Jake. Ethan's breath hitched. They hadn't been this close to anything connected to Jake since the day he disappeared. Ethan placed his gloved hand on the chilled metal door and slid it open just enough to slip inside. The interior was a cavern of stale air, bitter cold, and shadows layered over shadows. But in the corner, beneath a piece of torn tarp, lay Jake's navy blue winter coat. Ethan held it to his chest, feeling the fabric still warm enough to suggest it had been placed there hours ago, not days. He turned the coat over. No blood, no tears. But the zipper was broken in a way that reminded him of Jake's fidgeting habit. A spark of hope flickered painfully inside him. Before he could process it, a sound slammed through the container. Metal, shifting weight, then the unmistakable bang of the door closing. Ethan spun around, flashlight beam trembling across the ridged walls. He lunged for the door handle, but it had been locked from the outside by a heavy bar. For a moment, old battlefield instincts tightened his breath, memories of being trapped during a collapsed training structure years ago when he had nearly lost 2 soldiers under his command. The claustrophobia he had fought for years rushed back, clawing at his throat. He forced himself to stay still. "Ranger!" he shouted. The dog answered with a fierce bark that ricocheted through the metal. Scratching, digging, the click of claws, working at the door. Ranger was trained for moments like this. Ethan stepped back as light pierced through a thin gap the dog had pried open. Through sheer determination and strength, Ranger widened the opening, enough for Ethan to wrench the door free. Cold air crashed in as he stepped out, breathing hard. Ranger circled him, whining with worry. Ethan knelt, rubbing the dog's neck. "Good boy. You saved my life." But whoever locked that door had vanished into the labyrinth of snow and metal. Ethan scanned the ground with a soldier's scrutiny. That was when he found the first imprint. A boot print with a stabilized heel and deep outer tread, military style, not civilian. A few feet away lay a cigarette butt with a thin red band on the filter. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. Only one unit in his past had smoked that particular brand. Men who learned to hide stress behind expensive tobacco. Men trained under the same covert program Ethan once commanded. Someone who knew him well enough to anticipate his movements had walked this ground moments earlier. He straightened slowly, the weight of the discovery pressing into his spine. If someone from the Army's darker edges was involved, then Jake wasn't just missing. He was being hunted, targeted, or used. And the clue left inside the container felt deliberate, almost taunting. Ethan looked around the frost-glazed yard, every container now suspicious, every silence threatening. As he returned to the truck, something fluttered from beneath the container door, the faint corner of a small photograph. Ethan picked it up, and the world seemed to tilt a degree off balance. It was Jake, captured mid-step outside school, unaware he was being photographed. The photo trembled in Ethan's hand, but the message on the back froze him completely. In shaky pencil strokes it read, "If you want to see him again, don't call the police." But more chilling was the handwriting. Ethan recognized it from a news report he had memorized months ago. It belonged to Leo Martin, a 12-year-old boy who had gone missing the previous year and had never been found. Ethan felt the edges of the world harden. Ranger leaned against him, sensing the shift inside his owner, the transition from fear to a sharper, more dangerous state of resolve. Someone was orchestrating this, leaving breadcrumbs in the snow, pulling him deeper into a labyrinth. And Ethan Ward was going to follow, no matter where it led, no matter who from his past stood in the way. Snowfall thickened as Ethan Ward drove toward the east side of Minneapolis, a district where winter always seemed harsher and the roofs looked permanently tired. Streetlights flickered above sidewalks cracked by age, and the windows of narrow duplexes glowed faintly like distant lanterns. Ranger sat pressed against the passenger door, his ears twitching with a restless urgency, as if the scent from the photograph Ethan found near the container still clung to him. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tight. The photo had been placed deliberately, the handwriting from a child who vanished a year earlier. A message stitched with fear and warning. Whoever orchestrated this wanted Ethan to be led here, step by step, into the poorer quarters of the city. He parked beside a row of tightly packed houses. Ranger jumped out, nose instantly to the snow. The dog pulled forward, guiding Ethan past chain-link fences and sagging porches until they reached a narrow house with peeling pale yellow siding and a front door painted a faded sky blue. The color felt oddly gentle in a neighborhood where most doors were armored with extra locks. Ranger sniffed the bottom edge of the door intensely, tail rigid. Ethan raised his knuckles to knock, but before he touched the wood, the door cracked open. A small girl stood there, no older than 10. She had a soft, round face with light olive skin and a curtain of dark curls pulled into a messy ponytail. Her green eyes were alert, but not frightened, eyes that had learned to study strangers before deciding who they were. She wore an oversized purple sweater and mismatched socks, the attire of a child forced to grow up much faster than she should. "Are you Ethan Ward?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Children who live in troubled neighborhoods often speak like adults, Ethan thought. He knelt slightly so he didn't tower over her. "My name is Ethan. This is Ranger. We're looking for someone." He unfolded Jake's poster. The girl studied it for 2 seconds before nodding. "He was here. He slept on the couch for 2 nights. The words sliced straight through Ethan. "Where is he now?" She hesitated, lowering her gaze. Her fingers twisted into the fabric of her sweater. "A woman brought him. She brings kids sometimes, kids who look scared or cold. She gives them food, lets them sleep. Then she takes them away again." Ethan's heart pounded. "What woman?" The girl stepped back, revealing a dim living room with a sagging couch and a small heater humming in the corner. Inside, Ethan saw a man sitting at a worn dining table, mid-40s, bald with a thick black beard and strong, square features. He wore faded jeans and a grease-marked gray work shirt. The man glanced up, his dark brown eyes tired yet protective. This was Liam Cortez, Emma's father, a former mechanic who had shut down his shop after an accident crushed 2 of his fingers and left him permanently wary of authority. His face carried the weight of struggles he rarely voiced: long unemployment, lost insurance, and the daily grind of raising a child alone. Yet something gentle resided in the way he watched Emma. He rose to his feet and approached Ethan with slow caution. His voice was rough from years of engine fumes. "My girl says you're looking for your son. I believe her, and yes, your boy was here." He crossed his arms, muscles tensing. "But the woman who brought him, I don't trust her. She's tall, pale, black coat down to her knees, moves quiet, talks even quieter, comes at night." Ethan felt the cold creep deeper into his bones. Why let her bring children here? Liam's jaw tightened, shame flickering across his face. "They look hungry. She pays us a little for food. And Emma, she gets attached. I didn't think—" His voice cracked. "I didn't think she'd take them somewhere bad." Ethan didn't judge him. People in desperation make choices they later regret. He handed Liam the photograph. The man frowned. "That's your boy. I saw him in the hallway, drawing something in a notebook. Quiet kid, sweet." Emma tugged Ethan's sleeve and led him into the living room. She pointed at a low wooden shelf near the couch. Sitting on top was a small carved wooden dog, a crude but unmistakable figure of Ranger with the same perked ears and raised tail. Ethan's breath halted. Jake had made this from leftover carving wood last summer, proudly giving it to Ranger as a mini-me. Ethan traced the grooves with his thumb. Jake had held this. Jake had been alive, close, frightened, but fighting. Ranger nudged the toy gently, recognizing it, letting out a small whine that sounded heartbreakingly hopeful. Before Ethan could ask more, Ranger abruptly stiffened. A low growl rumbled from his chest as he sprinted toward the front yard. Ethan followed, heart racing. The night wind sliced across the porch as Ranger barked sharply at the empty street. Snowflakes danced in frantic swirls. Ethan knelt and examined the fresh tire tracks that cut across the street, still glistening with melted water, meaning the vehicle had left minutes ago. Wide, heavy tracks, cargo truck sized, headed east, toward the outskirts. The same direction as the radio signal. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching, and they had left mere moments before Ethan arrived. Ranger growled again, staring into the snowy dark as if he could see the ghost of the departing truck. Ethan felt it too. He had missed the person who knew where Jake was by only minutes. He rose slowly, jaw set, determination sharpening inside him like a blade. The chase was no longer blind. It had a direction. And Ethan Ward was done being led. Now he was hunting. The snowfall had thinned by the time Ethan Ward turned off the main road and followed the worn tire tracks toward the industrial outskirts of Minneapolis. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, muscles tight, ears forward, every breath sharp with anticipation. A faint haze hung over the open fields, low and gray, blurring the silhouettes of abandoned factories and aging warehouses. The tire marks cut straight toward a large structure ahead, an old freight warehouse, its rusted metal siding groaning softly under the winter wind. The faint throb of a generator vibrated in the night air. Someone was inside, someone active, someone hiding. Ethan parked a block away, letting Ranger jump down first to scout. The dog's tail stiffened, nose dipping into the snow, tracing scents. Ethan walked in a low crouch toward the side entrance, his boots sinking into the slush. When he reached the wall, he paused and inhaled deeply. The cold air bit his lungs, steadying him. He could feel it. Jake had been near a place like this, a place where children were moved like cargo in the dark. A dim light flickered through a cracked window. Ethan peeked inside. Several crates had been arranged into makeshift barriers, forming narrow tunnels. A man in a heavy coat paced among them. He was tall, bulky, with a shaved head and a square jaw, his breath puffing thickly in the cold air. A scar sliced down his cheek, leaving a pale, twisted line, an old wound healed badly. He moved with the graceless stiffness of someone who'd lived too long in fear and violence. Ranger nudged Ethan, signaling another presence. And then Ethan heard it. A soft whimper. A child's voice. Multiple voices. His pulse spiked. He circled quietly to the back, lifting a half-broken gate. Inside, in a dimly lit storage room, he found them. 3 children huddled beneath blankets on the cold floor. Their faces were pale and thin, cheeks hollow, eyes wide with terror. One boy, 12 at most, had sandy hair and a bruise on his jaw. A girl with auburn curls clutched her knees to her chest, trembling. The youngest, a tiny 7-year-old with freckles, stared blankly at the wall, lost in a shock far older than her years. Ethan knelt, softening his voice. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." The sandy-haired boy whispered, "They said someone would come tonight, to take us away again." "Not tonight," Ethan murmured. "Where's the man in charge?" The boy shook his head. "No one sees him. They only call him the overseer. But some guy said he runs everything from a place called Tower 6. Tower 6. The same code Ethan heard on the broken radio. His stomach twisted. Someone orchestrated something vast enough to hide dozens of missing children. A sudden metallic slam echoed from the hallway. Ranger barked once, short and sharp. Footsteps thundered toward the room. Ethan stood up, body tensing. A man crashed through the doorway, the same scarred guard from earlier. Up close, Ethan saw more. Pitted skin roughened by old fights, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, the shaking hands of someone who knew violence too well. The guard lunged, but Ethan sidestepped, slamming an elbow into his ribs. The man gasped, staggered, then swung wildly. Ethan grabbed his wrist, twisted, and forced him against the wall. Ranger growled behind him, close enough that the guard froze. "Name, now!" Ethan growled. The guard's breath rasped, panic rising. "I'm just paid to move kids. I don't choose any of this." "Who gives the orders?" Ethan pressed harder. The guard swallowed. "We don't know his name. He only uses the code. Overseer watches from Tower 6. We deliver, they pick up. That's it." Ethan leaned in, voice cold. "You have 5 seconds to give me something useful. A face, a direction, anything." Fear cracked the man's composure. "There's a camera, old system, half broken. It caught someone last week. Someone important." Ethan forced him forward at Ranger's warning snarl. The guard led him through a small security booth where an outdated monitor flickered in and out. One of the recorded frames froze long enough to reveal a blurred, grainy silhouette. But the jawline, square and sharp, the shoulders, broad, familiar, and the eyes. Even distorted, Ethan recognized the coldness. Cole Maddox, a name Ethan had buried years ago. Maddox had once served under him, reckless, volatile, brilliant in combat, but lacking discipline. After a violent outburst against civilians overseas, Ethan had filed the report that got Maddox dishonorably discharged. Maddox had vanished afterward, leaving behind threats whispered through clenched teeth. "You took my life. I'll take yours one day." And now he was here, running a network that preyed on the vulnerable, including Jake. Ethan felt the floor shift under him. For a moment, the warehouse noise faded, replaced only by the pounding of his own heartbeat. Ranger nudged him gently, grounding him. The guard lifted his hands. "Please, I told you everything." Ethan considered turning him in, but something else tugged at him. The children. He shoved the man aside. "Get out. If you warn Maddox, I'll find you." The guard bolted into the cold night. Ethan freed the children, helping them toward the exit. He dialed the precinct anonymously, giving the address. He would not stay. Police meant delay, questions, risk. Jake could be moved again. But before he left, the dusty speaker of the guard's two-way radio crackled. A familiar voice slipped through, cold, low, unmistakably controlled. "Ward, be smart. Stop chasing ghosts." Ethan froze. Ranger stiffened beside him. The voice continued, dripping with disdain. "You want your boy? Then learn your place." Static swallowed the rest. Ethan stared into the night, fists trembling, breath sharp. Maddox was watching. Maddox knew. And the chase had officially become a hunt. The first gusts of the incoming blizzard swept across the outskirts of Minneapolis as Ethan Ward steered his truck toward the coordinates he'd extracted from the guard's trembling confession. Snow blew sideways in sharp, fast needles, scraping the windshield like claws. Ranger braced himself in the passenger seat, muscles rigid, eyes burning with instinctive readiness. This storm would swallow the city by dawn, turning roads into white oblivion. But Jake didn't have until dawn. The second warehouse sat deeper in the industrial district than the first, half hidden behind stacks of abandoned freight containers. Its structure was newer. No rust, no broken siding, lights glowing faintly behind frosted windows. This wasn't a storage point. This was a transit hub. Children were brought here right before pickup, which meant Jake could have been inside mere hours ago. Ethan killed the engine and crouched low as he approached the side of the building. Footprints crisscrossed the snow, heavy boots, at least 4 or 5 men, pacing routinely. Ranger sniffed the air, tail low. The dog took a step toward a vent shaft and whined softly. Ethan put his hand on the vent's cold metal surface. Warmth radiated faintly from inside. Someone, was in that room. He pried it open quietly. Ranger slipped through the gap first, landing with a soft thump. Ethan followed, dropping into a dim maintenance hallway lit by dying fluorescent bulbs. Ahead, muffled voices echoed, male, low, impatient. Ranger's ears twitched, guiding Ethan down the narrow corridor and into a cramped side room. There, draped over the back of a metal chair, was a child's winter jacket. Dark blue, medium size, with a stitched patch of a wolf, Jake's favorite animal. Ethan grabbed it, pressing it to his chest. It was still warm. Jake had been here recently, within hours, maybe less. The air punched out of Ethan's lungs. Rage and hope collided inside him, sharp and painful. The sound of a door slamming snapped him back. He tucked the jacket inside his coat and signaled Ranger. Together they moved toward the voices. 5 men stood in the main loading area, surrounding a pair of trembling children no older than 8 or 9. The kids were barefoot, wrapped in thin blankets, shaking not just from cold, but terror. One man towered above the rest, a massive figure with thick arms, a square granite-like face, and a patchy beard flecked with frost. His name, as Ethan later learned, was Trent Halloran, a former oil rig worker whose temper had cost him both his job and his freedom before he slipped into Maddox's underground network. His heavy brow and permanently clenched jaw suggested a life hardened by bad decisions and worse company. Trent barked orders toward 2 others, one skinny and jittery, with pockmarked cheeks from old acne scars, the other stockier, tattooed arms peeking from under a thermal shirt. They weren't soldiers. They were opportunists. Violent. Because someone paid them to be. Ethan stepped from the shadows before he could second-guess himself. Ranger growled at his side. The men froze. Trent turned slowly, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits. "Ward?" he grunted, as if he'd been expecting this. "Maddox said you'd show up." "Maddox has something of mine," Ethan said, voice low and steady. "I'm here for the kids. Move aside." Trent laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You think one dog and an old soldier can stop this? We've got a schedule. These brats move before daylight." Ethan didn't answer. He moved. Ranger lunged at the tattooed man first, knocking him backward. Ethan swung the metal pipe he'd taken from the maintenance room, striking the skinny man in the ribs. Trent charged like a bull, fists raised, teeth bared. Ethan dodged but felt the rush of wind as Trent's punch slammed into the concrete pillar beside him. The fight turned brutal instantly. Ethan absorbed blows, returned them sharper. Ranger tore into Trent's leg, forcing him to stumble. Ethan used the moment and slammed Trent against a crate. The tattooed man reached for a knife, but Ethan kicked it away and pinned him with a forearm to the throat. "Where did they take my son?" Ethan demanded. Tattooed man gagged under the pressure. We just prepped them. We don't transport." Trent staggered up, clutching his bleeding leg. He spit onto the floor, glaring with fury. "Ward, you're too late. The kid was here. They moved him. Maddox ordered it." "Where?" Ethan barked. Trent hesitated until Ranger bared his teeth. Terror cracked his defiance. "The old communications tower, out in the woods. Tower 6, past Ridge Road. They said he leaves tomorrow morning." Ranger gave a low whine, urgent, insistent. A storm siren wailed faintly in the distance. The wind outside roared harder, rattling the warehouse walls. Snow was already piling high outside the loading doors. Tower 6. Remote. Isolated. Perfect for disappearing children. And by morning, the storm would swallow every path leading to it. Ethan backed away, collecting Ranger and the 2 frightened children. "Run," he told them. "Police will be here soon." The tattooed man coughed. "You'll never make it through that blizzard." Ethan shoved open the side door, snow blasting against his face. "Watch me." Behind him, thunder rolled through the frozen sky as the first wall of the blizzard crashed across the district. If he didn't reach Tower 6 now, he'd lose every trace of Jake forever. Snow hammered the windshield in white sheets as Ethan Ward pushed the truck as far as the dying roads would let him. Beyond a certain point, the forest swallowed the last signs of civilization, and the storm thickened into a white wall. Ethan pulled over, tightened his coat, and motioned to Ranger. The German shepherd leapt into the snow, fur rippling against the wind, his breath forming clouds in the air. Storm or not, they had no choice. Jake was somewhere inside Tower 6, and dawn would be too late. Ethan and Ranger trudged into the forest, boots sinking deep into drifts that reached halfway up Ethan's shins. Branches cracked overhead under the weight of fresh snow. Ranger followed Jake's scent, stopping occasionally to bark into the dark, guiding Ethan through the twisting pines. After an hour, the outline of the old military communications tower emerged, a tall, skeletal silhouette of metal and glass, rising above the tree line like a watchful ghost. Tower 6 had once been used for encrypted transmissions, but it had been decommissioned years earlier. Now it looked like a forgotten monument to a war no one remembered, its windows fogged with frost, its metal frame howling softly in the wind. A faint light flickered from somewhere inside, and Ethan felt his heart brace. Someone was home. At the entrance, a door hung partially open. Ranger growled low as they stepped inside. The lobby was freezing, the floor littered with old equipment crates and abandoned tech. But amid the dust lay something disturbingly new. Files, neatly stacked, stamped with coded labels. Ethan swept one open. His breath shortened. Inside were records, profiles of missing children, each categorized by psychological traits, physical endurance, problem-solving speed, reaction times. A sickening pattern emerged. These weren't random kidnappings. They were selections. The deeper Ethan searched, the more the horror sharpened. One folder detailed reflex tests performed on a girl from Ohio. Another listed survival simulations forced onto a boy from Colorado. Every file read like a military recruitment dossier. Except the subjects were children. Ethan's jaw tightened. Maddox wasn't just trafficking. He was building something twisted, structured, organized. A private army, a covert experiment, something born from a warped interpretation of military discipline. Ranger barked and sprinted up the metal staircase. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and followed, boots clanging against the steel steps. The wind cut sharper as they climbed higher. On the 5th floor, doorways led to rooms converted into observation chambers. Tablets blinked with battery warnings. Maps covered the walls, marked with routes, supply points, transfer schedules. But Ranger didn't stop until they reached the top. The highest level of Tower 6 was an open space surrounded by tall windows. Snow clung to the cracks in the glass. And in the center, lit by a hanging bulb, stood Cole Maddox. Leaner than Ethan remembered, but with the same calculating gaze. His short dark hair was streaked with frost, and his once straight nose now bore a jagged bend from an old break. A thin beard traced his jawline, the facial hair unkempt, giving him a feral look. He wore a tactical coat, black cargo pants, and boots polished with military precision. But his eyes, cold, hollow, were nothing like the soldier Ethan once commanded. Beside Maddox, tied to a chair, was Jake. The boy's brown hair was longer and tangled, cheeks pale, eyes red from crying. But he was alive. When he saw Ethan, something shuddered through him, a fragile, desperate spark of hope. "Ward," Maddox said, voice calm despite the storm rattling the tower. "You never could follow orders, even now." Ethan stepped forward, fists clenched. "Let my son go." Maddox tilted his head. "I'm giving him a future, a place in something bigger than your small, broken life." "That something is kidnapping and torture," Ethan growled. Maddox smiled faintly, a smile that showed he no longer knew the difference between purpose and delusion. "We were soldiers, Ward. Tools, replaceable, forgotten. I'm building something that lasts." He drew a knife slowly, the metal glinting under the bulb. Jake inhaled sharply, terror in his eyes. Ethan lunged, but Maddox was fast, faster than Ethan remembered. The two collided, crashing into a metal table. The knife scraped the floor. Maddox swung. Ethan blocked. The two men slammed against the window frame. The wind howled louder as cracks crawled across the glass. Maddox struck Ethan's ribs, knocking the air out of him. Ethan staggered, vision swimming. Maddox reached for the knife, but Ranger struck first. The German Shepherd barreled into Maddox's back, teeth sinking into the padded coat, dragging him away from the weapon. Maddox shouted, flailing to shove the dog off. Ethan seized the moment, tackling Maddox. Twish, the two rolling across the floor in a brutal tangle. Fists, elbows, boots, every blow fueled by years of betrayal. But Maddox always had an escape plan. He shoved Ethan hard, rolling away toward a trapdoor partially concealed under a metal grate. He kicked it open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "This isn't over," he hissed before dropping into the tunnel. Ethan lunged to follow, but a surge of icy wind shattered a nearby pane, forcing him back as snow blasted through. By the time he looked again, Maddox was gone. The storm screamed around them, the tower shaking under its force. Ethan turned to Jake, cutting his bindings. The boy collapsed into Ethan's arms, trembling. "Dad, I've got you," Ethan whispered, holding him close. "I'm here." Jake reached into his sleeve and pulled out a folded document, hands shaking. "Dad, there were others. I'm not the only one they want." The wind rattled the windows as Ethan held the paper tightly. This nightmare wasn't over. It was only beginning. Snow softened into a cold drizzle as dawn finally broke over Tower 6. Emergency vehicles arrived within the hour, their red and blue lights flashing against the pale morning sky. Ethan stood by the tower's entrance, Jake wrapped inside his coat, and Ranger pressed close to the boy's side as if refusing to give him even an inch of distance. Inside the building, agents in dark tactical jackets moved with careful precision, sealing off rooms, securing files, and marking evidence that told the story of a hidden operation stretching far beyond what Ethan could see. The man overseeing the immediate investigation was Special Agent Marcus Green, a tall African-American man in his late 40s with a firm jawline, neatly trimmed beard, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His posture carried years of discipline and fatigue, someone who had seen far too many broken families, far too many cases where he arrived just a little too late. Green approached Ethan, offering a respectful nod. "Ward, the information you brought in. This isn't small. You didn't just save your son. You might have just cracked open something national." Ethan's voice was low from exhaustion. "Then finish it. Maddox won't stop unless someone forces him to." Green exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose, a habit of someone constantly juggling too many cases and too many regrets. "We'll do everything we can, but a man like Maddox, he knows how to vanish. He was trained to." Jake tightened his grip around Ethan's arm. The boy's face was pale, thinner than before, his eyes carrying the distant look of a child who saw things no child should see. Ranger nudged him gently, letting out a soft whine that broke the silence. A female medic stepped toward them. Nurse Elena Ruiz, a woman in her mid-30s with warm brown skin, dark hair tied back in a braid, and gentle, steady hands that contrasted with the harsh winter scene. She examined Jake with professionalism layered over genuine kindness. "He's dehydrated and exhausted, but he's strong. He'll recover physically." She paused, her expression softening. "Emotionally, it may take time." Ethan nodded, gratitude tightening his throat. Jake had survived. That alone was a miracle. The next days blurred into paperwork, debriefings, and medical evaluations. FBI vans took away boxes of files, computers, old equipment, everything they could salvage from Maddox's twisted operation. Ranger was officially recognized by the local sheriff's department for assisting in the rescue, a ceremony marked only by the sheriff, a stocky man named Tom Hargrove with a graying mustache and a heavy winter coat, taking a knee beside the German Shepherd and fastening a small silver commendation tag onto his harness. Ranger accepted it with a proud yet humble tilt of his head, as if he understood the weight of what he had done. Jake struggled through the aftermath. At night he woke from nightmares, haunted by images of other children still trapped somewhere. Ethan sat beside him each time, stroking Ranger's head while keeping one arm around his son. Healing was slow, but every morning Jake held Ethan a little longer, and every evening Ranger curled closer against him. Eventually, Ethan made a decision. He packed up their belongings, signed the lease for a small, quiet home on the outskirts of a peaceful town, and prepared to leave the city, this time not as a soldier chasing ghosts, but as a father trying to build something safer, something whole. On the final morning before departure, Green shook Ethan's hand firmly. "We'll keep looking for Maddox, and for any other towers he might have used." Ethan's expression darkened. "He's not finished. The files Jake took, they mention multiple facilities." "We know," Green replied, "and we're widening the investigation. You've done your part, Ward. Now let us do ours." Ethan wanted to believe it, but part of him, the soldier part, the scarred part, knew better. Evil rarely vanished with one broken tower or one rescued child. It simply retreated, planned, shifted. Winter settled deeper around their new home that week. Jake slept more peacefully, though shadows still flickered behind his eyes. Ranger adapted quickly, patrolling the small yard every morning, tail up, alert yet calmer than before. For the first time in years, Ethan sensed the faint breath of a new beginning. Until the snow fell thicker one night. Ethan sat at his small kitchen table, sorting through old military letters he planned to finally throw away, when a faint crackle came from the drawer beside him. At first he froze. That sound hadn't echoed through his life since Chapter 1 of his nightmare. Slowly he opened the drawer and lifted the old military radio. It had no power source, no recent battery, yet the static grew louder. Jake, awakened by the noise, stepped into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Ranger rose instantly, posture tense. Then a distorted voice pierced through the static. "Tower 7, Target 2 is ready." Ethan felt the room tilt. Jake gasped softly. Ranger growled, recognizing the danger carried within a single sentence. Ethan locked eyes with the dog, brown, steady, loyal, unbreakable. Ranger held the gaze, ears forward, waiting. The battle wasn't over. It had barely begun. In the end, Ethan learned what so many of us forget in the storms of life. Even in the coldest nights, God leaves small signs of hope, sometimes in a voice, a footprint, a moment of courage, or the love of someone we thought we had lost. And when all seems impossible, a quiet miracle can still find its way to us. As you finish this story, may God bless you and your family with protection, strength, and peace in every step you take. If this touched your heart, please share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. May God's grace be with everyone watching. Sometimes a single story is all it takes to remind us that miracles still happen.